I first met Ted Kennedy when I was 18 years old as a volunteer for his first Senate campaign in the summer before I went to college. Then I met him again when I returned from Vietnam and we veterans encamped on the Mall in Washington. It was Ted Kennedy who had the courage to come down to the Mall one night and in a tent listen to us talk about Vietnam. We were controversial, but Ted broke the barriers and other senators followed. He worked his heart out for me in the presidential race of 2004, and he made the difference in Iowa. When we were down in the polls and I was slugging it out there, Ted brought his humor, his energy, and his eloquence to Davenport to help melt the snows of that state. There we were just 2 weeks before the caucuses, and his voice boomed out in this room, "You voted for my brother, you voted for my other brother, you didn't vote for me." And as the crowd roared with laughter, Ted bellowed, "But we're back here for John Kerry, and if you vote for John Kerry, I'll forgive you." "You can have 3 out of 4, he said. "And I'll love you, and I'll love Iowa." And let me tell you, Iowa loved him. For 25 years, I was privileged to work by his side, learning from the master. And over the years, I've received hundreds of handwritten notes from Ted, some funny, some touching, a few correcting me, all of them special treasures now. He thanked me for my gift of a Catholic study Bible, commenting, "My mother would be very grateful to you for keeping me in line." He thanked me for a particularly challenging charter lift home after 9/11 when it was hard to get anything in the air. And he wrote, "Here's a riddle for you. What do you get when you make 3 calls to the FAA, 2 calls to the Secretary of Transportation, and 3 calls to Signature Flight Support? You get a great trip to Boston." His way of saying thank you. And he thanked Teresa and me for the gift of a vintage bottle, concluding, "I just hope that I've aged as well as this wine." The personal touch Ted brought to life extended, we know, well beyond the Senate colleagues. It reflected the kind of man that he was and the kind of laws that he wrote. For 1,000 days in the White House, as Chris Dodd mentioned, President Kennedy inspired. For 80 days on the presidential campaign trail, Robert Kennedy gave us reason to believe and hope again. And for more than 17,000 days as a United States Senator, Ted Kennedy changed the course of history as few others have. Without him, there might still be a military draft. The war in Vietnam might have lasted longer. There might have been delays in granting the Voting Rights Act or in passing Medicare or Medicaid. Soviet Jewish refuseniks might have been ignored, and who would have been there to help them as Ted did? Without him, we might not have stood up against apartheid as forcefully as we did, and the barriers to fair immigration might still be higher today, if everyone only knew. Without Ted, 18-year-olds might not be able to vote. There might not be a Martin Luther King Day, Meals on Wheels, student loans, increases in the minimum wage, equal funding for women's college sports, health insurance, the Family Medical Leave Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, workplace safety, AmeriCorps, children's health insurance, if everyone only knew. He stood against judges who would turn back the clock on constitutional rights. He stood against the war in Iraq, his proudest vote. And for nearly 4 decades and all through his final days, he labored with all of his might to make health care a right for all Americans, and we will do that in his honor. In these last months, every visit Ted made to the Senate elicited an unstoppable outpouring of affection. Tears welled up in the eyes of Republicans and Democrats. Everyone missed his skills, his booming call to arms, and conscience. On his last visit, Chris Dodd and I sat in the back row beside his desk and listened to Teddy regale us with an imitation of his efforts to practice throwing out a ball for the Red Sox opening game. He laughed and he poked fun at how reluctant his hand and muscles were to obey his commands. I was in awe of this moment of humility and self-deprecating humor in the face of genuine frustration. And as he so often said over the years, we have to take issues seriously, but never take ourselves too seriously. He was a master of that too, and one of the great lessons that he taught me.